What if one dinner could unravel decades of silent injustice? Any longer? Elanor Whitmore had never imagined that stepping into her own restaurant as a stranger would reveal a truth so bitter it would make her question everything she'd built. On that crisp autumn evening, the Chicago skyline shimmered like a crown of glass and gold. Nora walked the streets unnoticed, her steps steady, her expression unreadable. Clad in a navy sweater and plain slacks, she looked like any other career woman closing out a long day, not the founder of Monarch Steakhouse, one of the most prestigious dining empires in the country. The Monarch sign glowed like a promise. It stood tall in the heart of the financial district, a beacon for politicians, executives, and high society elites. Inside, fortunes were toasted over vintage wines and aged ribeyes. It was a place where image ruled, and the unspoken rule was clear. Not everyone belonged. But tonight, Nora wasn't coming as the queen of this empire. She came as a ghost. She came to see what power often blinds you to. The host greeted her with the kind of well-practiced warmth designed to impress, not connect. "Table for one?" she asked. Nora nodded with a polite smile and was guided toward a booth near the back. It gave her the perfect view, not of the menu, but of the people. The restaurant radiated elegance. Dim lights kissed polished wood floors. Jazz notes floated through the air like perfume. Everything seemed perfect, until it wasn't. At first, service sparkled. A couple in designer wear was serenaded with pairing options for their wine. Businessmen roared with laughter as drinks flowed like water. But then the tone shifted. The door opened, and in walked a woman who clearly didn't fit Monarch's ideal. Gloria Mendez, mid-50s. A tired coat hung on her small frame. Her hair was streaked with silver, neatly tied back. She clutched her purse like it was her only defense. Every inch of her presence asked, "Am I allowed here?" Nora watched her closely. Gloria sat at a corner table near the kitchen, a location meant to be unseen. She held the menu like it was a foreign language. When the waiter came, she ordered the soup in a voice barely audible. "Just the soup?" the waiter echoed, his tone drenched in condescension. "Not even going to try the steak? Oh, that might be out of budget, huh?" A nearby server chuckled. A couple looked over with thinly veiled distaste. Gloria shrank into herself, lips pressed into silence. She didn't protest. She didn't ask for respect. She endured. That's when Nora's heart turned to ice. It wasn't just rudeness, it was a system, a culture of quiet cruelty. And Nora saw it wasn't accidental. It was allowed, encouraged. Across the room, wealthy guests basked in attention. A single glass of wine was never empty. Yet Gloria, forgotten. The elderly man across the room, ignored. The young couple with modest plates, invisible. And watching it all, doing nothing, was Brad Cole. General manager, industry veteran, and Nora's trusted hire. His arms crossed, posture relaxed, eyes sharp with indifference. He had seen it. All of it. And he let it happen. Nora's hand tightened around the menu. Her pulse slowed, not out of fear, but resolve. She'd once believed Monarch was built on excellence and heart, but what she saw tonight was rot hidden beneath polish. And if this was happening here, at the flagship, what was unfolding in the shadows of every other branch? She slipped her phone from her purse, opened a private note. 2 words. Dig deeper. She stood, left a generous tip, and walked out, not as a customer, but as a woman reclaiming her name. That night, back in her hotel room, the city stretched before her like a lie. Glittering lights pretending to promise something real. Nora sat in silence, her mind replayed each moment. Gloria's stillness, the sneers, the apathy, the realization this wasn't an accident. Somewhere along the way, expansion had replaced empathy. Branding had blinded her to the very people she'd once vowed to serve. Maybe this wasn't new. Maybe the truth had always been there, whispering beneath the surface, waiting for someone to finally listen. And now that she had, she wouldn't stop until every corner of her empire was exposed. Not for revenge, for justice. And for every soul like Gloria Mendez who had ever been made to feel small in a place meant to nourish. Because Nora wasn't here to fix Monarch. She was here to burn it down and rebuild something better from its ashes. Thoughts hit Nora like icy rain, sharp, relentless. How long had this been going on? Was Chicago the only rot in the tree, or was the disease deeper, more widespread? Was Brad the architect of this culture, or just another brick in the wall? She tapped her pen against the paper in her notebook, the rhythm echoing the storm brewing in her mind. She couldn't act on instinct alone. She needed evidence, patterns, names, and most of all, truth. The next afternoon, Nora returned to Monarch. Her appearance was unchanged. Modest clothes, no makeup, hair pulled back. She didn't want recognition. She wanted invisibility, and it worked. No one gave her a second glance. This time, she took a seat close to the service station, an overlooked corner of the room, perfect for observing. A waiter passed her without acknowledgement. Perfect. She was a shadow again. Then the whispers started. "I bet she's back for a freebie," one voice muttered with mockery. "She barely touched the bread, saving it probably," another replied, shaking his head in theatrical pity. A chuckle followed, laced with derision. Maybe if she knew how to use a steak knife, she wouldn't look like she wandered in from a soup kitchen. The words weren't aimed directly at anyone, but they didn't have to be. Nora clenched her jaw, her gaze icy and locked on the culprits, the same smug waiter from the night before, joined by another server, laughing quietly like bullies in a schoolyard. Brad stood at the bar, talking to a table of sharply dressed men. His voice was jovial, his gestures confident. He moved only to greet tables that mattered, those dripping with money, connections, or both. When another server approached him with a concern, an order delayed for a quiet couple, Brad dismissed it with a flick of his hand. Not worth his time. Not worth the effort. This wasn't oversight, it was intention. Nora's heart pounded, her fury masked beneath an expression of quiet composure. This wasn't just a crack in the foundation. This was a blueprint of exclusion, carved into every corner of the establishment. Then she noticed her, Marissa Okafor, a young woman moving through the dining floor with measured, careful steps. She didn't laugh with the others. She didn't join in the gossip. Her gaze stayed low, her actions precise. And every so often her eyes flicked nervously toward the smirking servers, as if she, too, felt the tension in the air, but was trapped in silence. Nora watched her for a few moments longer. Then, as Marissa passed her table, she spoke softly. "Excuse me." Marissa turned, startled. "Yes, ma'am?" "How long have you worked here?" Nora asked, her voice kind, open. Marissa hesitated. "About 6 months." "Whether it contributes to longer life expectancy, and how do you like it?" Another pause, a forced smile. "It's busy." Nora nodded, her voice lowering to a near whisper. "I couldn't help but notice. Not everyone's treated the same here." Marissa's face changed. Not drastically, but her eyes flinched. Her fingers tightened on her notepad. "I don't want to lose my job," she said quietly, pain slicing through her words. "But sometimes it doesn't feel fair." That was all Nora needed. Later, back at her hotel, the city lights sparkled against the windows like stars mocking her silence. She opened her laptop and dove headfirst into the digital archives of Monarch, Yelp, Google, TripAdvisor. The pattern emerged like bruises on pale skin. Overlooked service, cold stares, laughter meant for others. If you don't look rich, don't expect respect. I watched the staff fawn over the wealthy while ignoring the rest. And perhaps most damning, they'll never return. They made me feel like I didn't belong. Nora's stomach churned. These weren't isolated incidents. They were echoes of a culture left to fester under her watch. She had trusted others to uphold the values she once carved into Monarch's soul. But somewhere along the way, exclusivity had mutated into elitism. She wasn't just disappointed in Brad, she was furious with herself. The following evening, she returned to Monarch with a new strategy. This time, she wore elegance. A sleek black dress, understated gold earrings, a tailored coat that whispered money without screaming it. From the moment she entered, the change was immediate. The hostess's posture straightened. A waiter at the bar subtly alerted the others. Within moments, she was seated at a prime table, center stage. She ordered with calm authority, a vintage wine, the signature steak, all the signals of status. Then she struck. "I'd like to speak with the manager." Brad arrived with a smile that had charmed thousands. "Good evening, I'm Brad, the general manager. I hope everything is to your satisfaction." Nora leaned in slightly. "That depends." His brow arched slightly, curious but guarded. "There seems to be a pattern," she continued. "A distinct difference in how certain customers are treated." Brad smiled, the kind of smile that had deflected countless complaints. "We pride ourselves on offering exceptional service to all our guests." She held his gaze. "To all of them?" The smile cracked. "Of course," he replied smoothly. "But we do have standards. We cater to guests who appreciate the experience we offer. Naturally, if someone doesn't quite fit..." He let the sentence trail off like a veiled warning. That was it. The rot laid bare in one sentence. Nora raised her glass slowly, took a sip, and set it down. "Thank you, Brad. You've given me exactly what I needed." His expression twitched. For a second he realized something had shifted. But it was too late. She dismissed him with a nod, turning her attention back to her meal. Once he left, she pulled out her phone and typed a single email. Subject line, UG Urgent Review, Monarch Chicago Branch. Inside, a damning report. Toxic culture. Prioritization of wealth over dignity. A general manager who didn't just allow it, but defined it. "Go ahead and define it." And her promise to the board. "A full internal audit begins immediately." She hit send. And with that, the first stone fell from the gilded walls of Monarch. Outside, winter whispered through the streets. People moved through their routines, unaware that a storm had begun brewing behind the golden doors of Monarch Steakhouse. But Nora knew. And soon, so would everyone else. Outside, the city's rhythm pulsed on. Horns, footsteps, the distant hum of commuter chatter. But within the walls of Monarch Steakhouse, time felt suspended. Something was about to break. The double glass doors opened, and a team of corporate inspectors stepped into the restaurant. No warning, no announcement. Their presence alone shifted the atmosphere like a sudden drop in barometric pressure before a storm. Brad Cole spotted them instantly. He stood near the bar, his hand tightening around the base of a whiskey glass, eyes narrowing. In his decades in the hospitality world, Brad had learned to smell danger before it struck, and this wasn't a random quality check. The lead inspector, an older man with steel gray eyes and a demeanor carved from years of executive scrutiny, approached the hostess stand, clipboard in hand, voice even but cold. "We're conducting a quality audit on behalf of Monarch Corporate." Routine? Brad didn't buy it, not for a second. But his smile was reflexive, smooth, rehearsed, a shield honed over years. "Of course," he said with polished ease, happy to cooperate. He turned toward the staff, voice calm but firm. "Let's show them what Monarch is all about." Servers exchanged glances. A stiffness crept into their movements. Smiles became strained. The practiced elegance of exclusivity now replaced by artificial hospitality, like an actor slipping into costume moments before curtain call. From a distant corner of the dining room, Nora watched it all unfold with razor-sharp focus. She hadn't revealed herself. Not yet. She wanted to see how Brad performed under the heat of scrutiny, and he didn't disappoint. For the first 30 minutes, it was an impressive performance. Tables were attended with symmetry. Glasses stayed full. Even the simplest diners received the same polite tones usually reserved for executives. But it was theater. Nora could see it in the cracks. Employees who looked unsure before stepping toward certain guests. Servers glancing toward Brad before taking action, as if seeking silent permission. It wasn't instinct guiding them. It was fear. Then came the moment that shattered the illusion. An elderly man stepped inside, clean but modest, a wool coat pulled tight against the chill, shoes worn but polished. He stood upright, though his eyes betrayed uncertainty, like he was preparing to be turned away. One of the younger waiters spotted him, the same one who'd mocked Gloria. His jaw tightened. His gaze dropped to the man's shoes. "I'm sorry, sir," he said coolly, "but I'm not sure we have anything on the menu that would be a good fit for you." Silence. The words hung in the air like smoke, deadly, staining. Across the room, the lead inspector slowly lifted his gaze. His pen paused mid-note. A colleague glanced toward him. Brad froze. Nora saw it, the shift in his shoulders, the flash of panic behind his eyes before he caught himself. He approached quickly, his voice even. "There's been a misunderstanding," Brad said. "Of course we have something for you, sir. Let me find you a table personally." He offered a courteous smile, but his eyes betrayed him tight with rage, humiliation. This wasn't supposed to happen. Not today. The older gentleman nodded with hesitation and followed Brad to a table, but the damage was done. The inspector made a mark on his clipboard. And then Brad turned and saw her. Nora didn't flinch. She met his gaze directly. Calm, steady, unforgiving. Recognition flickered in his eyes. Not certainty, but suspicion. And something darker, a flicker of dread. Later, in the conference room, the silence was suffocating. Brad sat with his fingers laced tightly, posture rigid. Across from him, the lead inspector flipped through pages of reports, eyes scanning with clinical dissection. The room was stripped of warmth. No soft lighting, no polished mahogany, just four walls, truth and consequence. Brad cleared his throat, his voice thick with manufactured calm. "We all know what this is," he said. "A misunderstanding. One unfortunate comment by an employee, not indicative of our culture." The inspector didn't blink. "A misunderstanding," he repeated. Brad nodded. "Our staff are trained to serve all patrons." That remark was a lapse in judgment. The inspector tapped the folder. "Yet, we've collected years of online complaints. Guests overlooked, service based on appearance and wealth, managers dismissing concerns. That's more than a lapse. That's a pattern." Brad's jaw tensed. "High-pressure environments create tension," he replied. "We push for excellence. Maybe some staff cracked under that pressure. In particular, Sergeant Paul Denton?" The inspector leaned back, eyes sharp. Or maybe they were following leadership. Silence stretched, thick, heavy. "We'll be conducting private interviews with staff," the inspector continued. "If there's nothing to hide, there's nothing to fear." Rad offered a tight nod, but his grip on the chair tightened. One by one, employees filed in. Most responses were vague, professional, neutral, too careful. Then came Marissa. She paused at the door. Her eyes swept the room. Brad stared back, stone-faced. Then she saw Nora. Still, silent, watching. And something shifted. "I've worked here 6 months, Marissa began, voice steady but soft. "I've seen people treated differently based on how they look, what they wear, how much they spend." Rad stirred. "Marissa, you don't..." She didn't flinch. "I've seen guests ignored, heard jokes about which tables deserve good service, and when we complain, management doesn't care. We all know which customers matter, and which ones don't, and which ones upend. As witness wild fresh breath, they elicit yet imposing unearthly output." She wasn't angry, she wasn't raising her voice. But truth doesn't need volume. Brad stood. "You don't know what you're talking about." The inspector didn't look up. "Mr. Cole, please sit." Rad froze, then slowly lowered himself. Marissa looked to Nora once more, and Nora gave her the smallest nod, silent affirmation. The inspector closed his notepad. "I think we've heard enough." And Brad, for the first time, he didn't know what to say. He'd weathered complaints, audits, even lawsuits. He'd learned how to talk in circles, how to spin reality. But this moment, spoken by someone who had nothing to gain and everything to lose, was different. The truth had a voice now, and it was louder than him. As the meeting ended, a strange quiet lingered. Outside, the restaurant buzzed with ordinary life. Glasses clinked, laughter echoed. But inside that room, the center of power had shifted. And Brad Cole knew it wasn't his anymore. Brad's control was slipping, and the room could feel it, the air tightening like a storm cloud collapsing in on itself. Then a chair scraped quietly against the floor. Nora stood. She didn't speak at first. She didn't have to. The way she adjusted her jacket, the quiet deliberateness in her step. It was the kind of presence that carried weight before a word was ever uttered. Outside the conference room, the soft murmur of activity dwindled. Employees paused mid-stride. Conversations hushed. Something was happening. Whispers moved like a current across the restaurant. There was something about her. Something composed, yes, but also resolute, unapologetic, powerful in a way that felt earned, not inherited. I just don't. Rad watched her approach, his eyes narrowing as recognition started to bleed through the confusion. His instincts screamed at him. This woman was not a threat. She was the reckoning. And then she spoke, with a voice calm yet commanding. "My name is Elanor Whitmore," she said. "I'm the CEO of Monarch Steakhouse." The silence that followed was deafening. The inspector's pen froze mid-stroke. Marissa sat up straighter, lips parted in disbelief. Staff in the hallway leaned in slightly, as if watching history turn in real time. Rad's face went pale, like blood draining from glass. He knew. Not just who she was, but what it meant. This wasn't a casual visit, this was judgment. He forced a brittle smile, teeth clenched behind it. "Well, this is certainly an unexpected pleasure, Mrs. Whitmore. Had I known you were coming..." Nora cut him off, cool and unshaken. "That's exactly why I didn't announce myself." Her voice was quiet, but every word struck like a bell toll. "I didn't come here to be given special treatment. I came to see how my customers are treated when they aren't me." That truth, raw and sharpened, settled over the room like a dense fog. One server by the door shifted uncomfortably. Another looked away, face burning. Brad opened his mouth, grasping for a lifeline, but she moved before he could. From her bag, she pulled a thick folder and set it on the table with a precise, deliberate motion. Not legal documents. Worse. It was evidence. Printouts of customer complaints, emails, forgotten surveys, reviews that had gone ignored, buried under PR smiles and hollow assurances. "I assume you're familiar with these," she said, folding her arms. Brad hesitated. His fingers twitched. "With all due respect," he began, his voice oily again. "People exaggerate online. It's the nature of hospitality." She didn't flinch. She opened a page. "I was ignored for 20 minutes while servers doted on wealthier guests," she read. "When I finally flagged someone down, I was treated like a burden." She flipped to another. "When I asked for the manager, he looked at me like I didn't belong, like I was wasting his time." Nora's eyes met Brad's. "That was from 3 months ago, and this one, from last year." Brad's jaw tensed. His defense faltered. "This isn't a bad shift, Brad. This isn't a difficult day. This is systemic." The inspector leaned back, arms crossed, intrigued. Brad tried again. "We cater to a high-end clientele," he said. "They expect a certain atmosphere." "Hospitality," Nora interjected, her voice like ice wrapped in velvet, "doesn't mean groveling at the feet of the wealthy." She took a step closer, her gaze unwavering. "If you think exclusivity is an excuse for exclusion, then you have fundamentally misunderstood what Monarch is supposed to be." He couldn't respond. He wouldn't. But Nora wasn't done. Brad sat upright, hands braced on the table, defiant. "With all due respect, Mrs. Whitmore," he snapped, "I've been running this location for over 20 years. I know what works. I know what keeps the lights on." "You mean people with money," she replied coldly. He leaned forward. "People come here for the best. The food, the wine, the atmosphere. They come here to be among their peers. You start treating everyone the same, you lose that. You lose what makes this place special." She smiled, not warmly, but precisely. "Tell me, Brad, when was the last time someone walked in here and said, 'I hope today I get to watch someone else be humiliated'?" He faltered. "No one pays for cruelty," she continued. "No one buys a $300 0-cents bottle of wine to feel superior. That's not hospitality. That's just ego dressed up in linen napkins." Brad's voice was tight now, desperate. "If you enforce these changes, we'll lose the very people who made us successful." She stared back with steel in her eyes. "Then maybe those aren't the people we need." The room went utterly still. Brad reeled, trying to hold the last word, until another voice, quiet but clear, rose from the back. "I don't think it's failing because we're serving the wrong people," Marissa said, her voice stronger than before. She stepped forward. "It's failing because we forgot what real service means, and it's not about pampering the elite. It's about dignity. It's about treating every single guest like they matter." The ripple started there. Another voice added, "She's right." Then another, and another. A chorus of quiet rebellion. Brad looked around, his staff, his people slipping through his fingers. Their eyes no longer sought his approval. They looked to her. He shot up from his chair, voice snapping. "You think this is how you run fine dining, by giving everyone the same damn experience?" But the answer had already arrived. In their silence, in their turning. Nora didn't yell. She didn't posture. She simply stood. Still, steady. Because a storm doesn't need to rage to destroy. Sometimes all it takes is the truth spoken out loud. Brad's voice grew louder, desperate now. "You really think a business like this survives by treating everyone the same?" He turned to Nora, eyes burning with frustration. "You're making a mistake. Change this restaurant, change how it runs, and you'll lose everything that makes it special." Nora stood, unmoved. "You've had over 2 decades to define what made Monarch special," she said evenly, her tone calm but cutting. "And you chose exclusion." Her gaze didn't waver. "Now I'm choosing something else." The word struck harder than any raised voice could have. The room stood suspended in silence. Brad could feel it. All those years of being untouchable, revered, even feared, slipping through his fingers like dust. But he wasn't ready to fall quietly. "You think this will fix everything overnight?" he scoffed. "Let's see how fast the people who really matter walk away. The VIPs, the ones who built Monarch. When they leave, so does your revenue." Nora gave a slight nod, her expression steady, and left them. The silence that followed was not passive. It was final. Brad didn't argue further. He couldn't. The decision had already been made. Later, in the confines of his office, the fury boiled over. He paced like a man possessed, phone pressed tightly against his ear, voice low but seething. "These changes will kill everything we've built. Do you understand that?" He paused, listening. On the other end, a senior stakeholder sighed. "Brad, Nora is the CEO. She has the authority, and frankly, she has support." Brad gritted his teeth. "She's not reforming, she's dismantling. If we start lowering our standards, if we become accessible, we're just another mid-tier steakhouse." "Serving people with dignity isn't lowering standards," came the reply. Quiet, firm. Brad swallowed. The words stung more than he expected. "This is bigger than that," he pushed, his desperation rising. "The high-end clients, the corporations. If they start seeing this place as common, they'll walk. You know what happens when that money disappears." Another pause. Then, "The board's already meeting with Nora today." Brad froze. "You what, without me?" "You weren't informed?" the voice asked, not with concern, but surprise. Brad stared at the screen after the call ended, his face carved in disbelief. He had been outmaneuvered. Again. At Monarch's corporate headquarters, the boardroom felt like the eye of a brewing storm. The glass table reflected the pristine lighting above, but the tension was anything but sterile. Seated at one end was Nora, calm, poised. If she felt pressure, it didn't show. Her presence was both disarming and commanding. Brad stormed in, face flushed. "You went behind my back," he snapped. "You didn't give me a chance to defend myself." "I invited you to this discussion," Nora replied coolly. "You chose your response." He sat, fists clenched. A senior board member, Richard Langley, cleared his throat. "Brad, we've reviewed more than just this week's fallout. These issues go back years. Ignored complaints, repeated patterns. It's a smear campaign," Brad spat, gesturing toward Nora. "She's never run a fine dining location. She's turning Monarch into some generic feel-good cafe." Across the table, Evelyn Carter, another seasoned executive, leaned forward. "And what was it meant to be, Brad?" He straightened, inhaling deeply. "A sanctuary for refined taste, for people who appreciate true service. That's what makes us different." Nora calmly slid a thick folder across the table. "Service without compromise, you said. Does that include ignoring discrimination complaints, mocking guests behind their backs, seating disabled customers near the kitchen while better tables stay open?" She flipped the folder open, revealing page after page of documented failures. "Here's a complaint from an employee who said, if you don't play along, you're treated like an outsider. That's not culture. That's corrosion." Brad's face darkened. "Do you think five-star restaurants run on feelings?" Nora tilted her head. "Do you think they survive on arrogance?" A younger board member spoke up. We're not talking about lowering standards, we're redefining what excellence means. If Monarch is going to thrive for another 50 years, it can't be built on exclusion. There were nods. Brad saw it happening again, the shift, though he played his final card. If you push me out, you risk alienating the very clients who built this brand, people who expect exclusivity. Nora didn't let him finish. If our business depends on serving those who believe respect is a privilege instead of a right, her voice softened, then we've already failed. Silence. And then, with precision and finality, she leaned forward. I'm not destroying Monarch's reputation. I'm reclaiming it, and I won't let it be led by someone who has allowed discrimination to fester. She slid another document across the table. Effective immediately, Brad. You are suspended, pending internal investigation. Brad stood, shocked, shaking. You don't have the authority. I do, she said. As CEO, I have the right to act when there is clear evidence of misconduct, and there's plenty of it. He stared around the room, searching for someone, anyone, to back him. But the faces had changed. No loyalty, no support, only silence. He turned, stormed toward the exit, but before leaving he glanced back. One last time. For dignity. For redemption. But all he saw was Nora. Still, calm, watching. The next morning, Monarch was everywhere. Not for its wine pairings or signature filet, but for headlines. CEO shakes legacy brand to its core. Is mine lowering its standards or raising the bar? Revolution or ruin? The steakhouse war. Nora scrolled through them in her office. Every article reeked of Brad's fingerprints, anonymous sources, twisted facts. He had gone to the media, spinning the narrative. Monarch was under siege. The brand was being diluted. Loyal patrons were being pushed aside in favor of a bland, one-size-fits-all approach. The spin was slick, and it was working. By noon, investors were calling. That afternoon, the board reconvened. The conference room buzzed with unease. Richard Langley began, measured. Nora, the press storm is escalating. Investors are nervous. Clients are whispering. Evelyn added gently. We support the mission, but we can't ignore the financial impact if the backlash continues. Nora listened in silence. She had seen it coming. But she wasn't backing down, not now. Because she knew this wasn't just about image. It was about identity. And Monarch. Her Monarch was finally becoming something worthy of its name. The air in the boardroom was taut with concern. We could see a drop in revenue, one board member said, his voice echoing the caution already written across the room. Nora remained poised, hands folded calmly on the table. Revenue won't fall because we improve service, she said evenly. It'll fall if we continue alienating people with outdated elitist policies. Richard Langley sighed, pressing his fingers into his temples. That's not how the media is spinning it. Right now the story is that Monarch is abandoning its legacy. Then we change the story, Nora replied, scanning the room. Eyebrows rose. Some leaned forward, others shifted uncomfortably. And how do you plan to do that? Evelyn asked, her tone curious but cautious. We hold a press conference, Nora said. There was a beat of silence, then skepticism. Langley scoffed under his breath. You want to walk into the fire and face the media head-on? Yes, Nora said firmly, because hiding isn't leadership. We've let Brad and his ilk tell our story for too long. It's time we told our own. Evelyn studied her for a long, thoughtful moment. Then she gave a slow nod. All right, let's hear what you have to say. The press conference was arranged within 24 hours. The room was electric. packed shoulder to shoulder with journalists, photographers, industry analysts. Cameras clicked as Nora approached the podium. Her silhouette stood tall against the branded backdrop, the Monarch logo faintly glowing behind her. She didn't hesitate. "I know there's been a lot of noise about the changes happening at Monarch," she began, voice steady and clear. "So allow me to set the record straight." The room fell quiet. "We are not lowering our standards," she said, her tone growing sharper. "We are raising them." She paused, let the sentence breathe. True luxury isn't about who can afford to be treated well. It's about creating an experience that everyone deserves. Hospitality is not a currency to be earned, it is a right. And scribbled, cameras zoomed. "I understand that some longtime clients may feel uneasy, but if the only reason they came to Monarch was to feel superior to others, then they were never the kind of customers we should have been serving in the first place." A ripple of gasps moved through the room. But Nora pressed on. "Our mission is simple. Excellence without arrogance. Service without segregation. If that costs us a handful of patrons who mistake privilege for identity, so be it." She stepped back, ignoring the barrage of questions, the reaching hands, the shouted names. The message had been sent. Now the world would decide what to do with it. That night, as twilight bled into the windows of her office, Nora sat alone, her screen lit up with headlines. Some called her a revolutionary. Others called her reckless. Monarch CEO sets fire to legacy, but is it brilliance or burnout? Is hospitality finally catching up with modern values? She expected the backlash, but one message chilled her. A plain envelope, no return address. Inside, a single sheet of paper. "Do you really think Brad was acting alone? There are bigger forces at play, and they don't want you to win." Nora read it twice. The room seemed to grow colder around her. For weeks, she'd believed Brad was the rot, but now she saw it. He was only a symptom. The roots of this disease ran far deeper. She leaned back, exhaling. This wasn't about reforming one restaurant. This was about dismantling an entire power structure. The next morning, Nora arrived early. She bypassed her assistant's worried glance and locked herself inside her office. Then she began to dig. She scoured internal reports, old emails, exit interviews. Patterns emerged, across cities, across years. And all led back to one name. Raymond Lancaster. A senior stakeholder, a patriarch in the industry, the man who turned Monarch from a boutique concept into a national brand. He wasn't just an investor, he was the architect of its culture. And he wasn't watching from afar, he was controlling it. That afternoon, a gold-trimmed invitation landed on her desk. A charity gala. High profile, elite. Raymond's playground. If she was going to confront him, it would be there. The ballroom shimmered with power. Chandeliers cast soft gold over tailored suits and sparkling gowns. Servers glided with precision. Crystal glasses clinked with aged champagne. Nora entered, regal in a midnight blue gown, her presence quiet but commanding. She scanned the room and found him. Raymond Lancaster, flanked by influencers and financiers, laughed with effortless control, his silver hair combed to perfection, his posture royal. He approached. His eyes caught her before she even arrived. A knowing smirk tugged at his lips. "Nora," he said, lifting his glass, "I was wondering when you'd find me." She stopped before him, unreadable. "I assume you already know why I'm here." "Of course," he said smoothly. "You've made quite the splash toasting Brad, stirring up headlines. I'm impressed." Then, a sigh, but also disappointed. "Disappointed," she repeated. He spoke like a man explaining math to a child. Monarch was built on a foundation of excellence. For a certain caliber of guest. "Caliber," she said. Is that what we're calling it now? He shrugged. Not everyone belongs in every space. That's the real world, Nora. People pay for exclusivity. They don't want to dine next to people who don't fit. Her voice sharpened. You mean people who don't fit your definition of wealth and status? Raymond took another sip, still smiling. Those customers are the lifeblood of Monarch. They elevate the brand, and they won't stay if the brand becomes common. They don't love Monarch, she replied. They love how Monarch makes them feel superior. His smirk faded. She pressed forward. Real luxury isn't about keeping people out. It's about making everyone feel they belong. The world doesn't want that, he said coolly, and neither does this industry. He leaned closer. Let me give you some advice. You may think you're running this, but you're not. Power in this business doesn't come from titles. It comes from alliances, from networks, from men like me. And he stepped back, setting down his drink. And if you keep pushing the wrong people, you'll find out just how fast they can erase you. A threat, polite, polished, but unmistakable. Nora didn't blink. She stepped in, her voice low, her words deliberate. Thank you for the warning, Raymond. Now here's mine. She met his eyes, steady. I'm not afraid of you. Because Nora understood something deeper than leverage or reputation. Real power isn't in fear. It's in conviction, and she was just getting started. Power doesn't always fall in a single blow. Sometimes it crumbles, chipped away piece by piece until one day you look around and realize there's nothing left. And Raymond Lancaster had just begun his final strike. The morning after their tense encounter at the gala, the corridors of Monarch's headquarters were thick with whispers, phone calls behind closed doors, side glances in elevators. Something was shifting. Nora could feel it, like the pressure drop before a storm. Raymond wasn't wasting time. Investors had started pulling out. Legacy business partners quietly questioned their contracts, and the board, under pressure, called for an emergency vote. They didn't need to say what it was about. Raymond was trying to remove her. Marissa was the first to warn her. She slipped into Nora's office, closing the door behind her like a confidant in a coup. They're turning, she said, voice low. Raymond's been making calls, telling people you're letting emotions ruin the business. Nora's stomach tightened. Marissa hesitated, enough that it could go either way. That was all she needed to hear. 3 hours. That's all she had to remind them who she was and what she stood for. The boardroom was full. Executives, investors, managers, all seated, all watching. Raymond sat near the center, his face the picture of calm control. Nora entered like a storm contained in heels, unflinching, measured. The chairman cleared his throat. We're here to discuss the leadership direction of Monarch Steakhouse. Mr. Lancaster, as the one who called this meeting, you may begin. Raymond stood, hands clasped behind his back like a professor addressing a room of students. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, smooth as silk. We've all seen the recent backlash. Headlines, canceled reservations, our identity is being questioned. Monarch has always stood for prestige, for providing a dining experience tailored to those with refined expectations. If we treat every guest the same, what differentiates us? A few heads nodded slowly. We are not a family diner. We are not casual. We are an institution, and institutions are not built on appeasing the masses. They are built on distinction. He paused. That's why I believe Elanor Whitmore's leadership no longer aligns with Monarch's best interests. The silence that followed was suffocating. Then Nora stood. When I became CEO, she began, I made a promise. to preserve Monarch's legacy and to guide it into the future. And that's exactly what I'm doing. She paused, scanning the room. But success isn't measured by who we keep out, it's measured by who wants to come back. She picked up a remote and clicked. On the screen, two graphs appeared, one showing decline, the other growth. Here, she said, pointing to the left, is the performance of our high exclusivity locations, declining revenue, low retention. She clicked again. Now here, this is where we introduced our new service model, inclusive, unbiased, human, 177% increase in returning guests, younger demographics, higher average spending, higher satisfaction. She turned to the room. This isn't destruction. This is evolution. I'm not here to erase what we built. I'm here to ensure it still exists 50 years from now. She looked at Raymond. His smile had faded. Exclusivity is not the future, she said. Excellence is. The chairman stood. It's time to vote. The tally came back, tied. All eyes turned to one man, Martin Greaves, the final vote. Raymond leaned in, calm. Martin, you know what this brand means. Don't let emotions guide a billion-dollar decision. Martin said nothing. Nora, without blinking, addressed the room. I understand the fear of change, but we're already losing what we're trying to protect. The world is changing. The question is, will Monarch change with it or vanish clinging to old ideas? She closed her folder. I'm not the one risking Monarch's future, she said. Raymond is. The silence cracked as Martin finally leaned forward. I vote for Nora. A breathless second passed. Raymond didn't speak. He didn't argue. He stood, adjusted his jacket, and turned to Nora. This isn't over, he muttered. Nora answered softly. I never expected it to be. The media storm began the next morning. The fall of a legacy. Has Monarch lost its identity? Every headline was designed to weaken her. Brad didn't speak publicly, but Raymond didn't need him to. His network of media insiders spun the story with surgical precision. But then something unexpected happened. A video clip of Nora on a national interview went viral. No one walks into a restaurant expecting to feel less than, she said. If the only reason you dine at Monarch is to feel superior to someone else, we don't need your business. The internet ignited. A hashtag emerged, dignity for all. It started with former customers, then came restaurant workers, then celebrities, business leaders, influencers. And soon the tide turned. The Monarch was no longer the villain, it was the spark. And Raymond Lancaster, he became a liability. The board called another emergency meeting. This time it was about him. He didn't fight it. But as he walked past Nora, he paused. You think you've won, he said. But change is fragile. One slip, and it all falls apart. Nora stared back. Then I'll make sure it never does. The transformation began immediately. Brad was formally terminated. His removal wasn't just practical, it was symbolic. In his place, Nora appointed someone who shared her vision. And for customer relations, she turned to Marissa. You saw it first, Nora said. You spoke up when no one else did. I need that kind of courage. Marissa, stunned but honored, accepted. Across the country, Monarch locations underwent a rebirth. Not just policy, but culture. Unconscious bias training. Accountability systems. A new standard of hospitality, where dignity wasn't a luxury, but a given. At first, there was pushback, whispers of overreach, but then, slowly, the stories began to change. Families welcomed, young couples returning, smiles replacing suspicion. In the numbers, while they spoke louder than critics ever could. Reservations rose, reviews surged. Monarch wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. Then one afternoon, an envelope arrived. No return address. Inside, Brad's handwriting. Nora, I thought you were tearing Monarch down. I see now. You were trying to save it. I hope you succeed. Because if you do, it means this industry has finally become better than people like me ever allowed it to be. She folded the letter. Not forgiveness, not friendship, but something like closure. Because change is never easy. It takes guts, it takes sacrifice, it takes leaders who are willing to be hated before they are understood. Nora Whitmore didn't just protect Monarch's legacy. She rewrote it. This isn't just a story about a restaurant. It's about power, about courage, about whether we're willing to ask hard questions, even when the answers make us uncomfortable. Because sometimes, one woman asking what if we did better is all it takes to change everything. So the next time you see something broken, ask yourself, would you stay silent, or would you stand up and rebuild it better? If this story moved you, let's talk in the comments, and for more stories that stirs something deeper, don't forget to subscribe, because the next one might just change the way you see the world.